One American tank, 40 German Panzers, one crew, one battle that should have been a massacre. Lafayette Pool looked through his periscope at a horizon crawling with German armor and said 5 words that would echo through history. We're not retreating, we're hunting. What happened next violated every rule of armored warfare. It defied physics, tactics, and common sense. The Germans would later refuse to believe the after-action reports. Allied commanders thought it was propaganda. But it happened. Every word of it is true. By the end of that day, the field would be littered with burning German tanks, and one battered Sherman would roll through the smoke like a ghost that refused to die. This is the story of how one American tank crew rewrote the rules of war, and it starts with understanding why everyone thought the Sherman didn't stand a chance. Let me take you back to 1944. If you were an American tanker climbing into a Sherman, you knew the odds. The Germans had Tigers. They had Panthers. They had tanks that could punch through your armor from over a mile away while your shells bounced off their fronts like pebbles. The British called Shermans Ronsons after the cigarette lighter because they burst into flames so easily. The Germans called them Tommy cookers. When a German commander spotted a Sherman, it wasn't a fight. It was target practice. The math was brutal, and everyone knew it. In Normandy, it took an average of 5 Shermans to take out one German Panther. 5-1. And that assumed all 5 survived long enough to get into position. Tank crews had a dark saying: the first one gets spotted, the second one gets hit, the third one kills the Panther. Nobody wanted to be first or second. But here's what they didn't tell you in the history books that make it sound hopeless. Here's the thing about the Sherman that the tiger myth overshadows. The Sherman wasn't trying to be a tiger. It was designed for something completely different. And in the right hands, with the right crew, that difference became deadly. Speed, reliability, vision, coordination. While a tiger crew sat in their steel fortress waiting to ambush, a Sherman could be in 3 different positions before the German gunner even rotated his turret. While a Panther's commander squinted through a narrow periscope, a Sherman commander had a full 360-degree cupola and could spot threats from any direction. And while German tank doctrine was about individual killing power, American doctrine was about pack tactics. Wolves, not lions. But doctrine only matters if you have the crew to execute it, and that's where Lafayette Pool comes in. Lafayette Green Pool, Staff Sergeant, from Odom, Texas, 21 years old. Before the war, he was a steel worker. Hot, dangerous, precise work where one mistake meant losing a finger or worse. He learned to move fast, think faster, and never hesitate. When he joined the Army, something clicked. Tank gunnery wasn't just a skill for Pool. It became an obsession. While other crews were grabbing chow, Pool was drilling. While they were writing letters home, he was studying German tank manuals, memorizing weak points, calculating engagement ranges. His crew called him a perfectionist. His commanders called him intense. The Germans would call him something else entirely. Pool's philosophy was simple: fast, precise, ruthless. Fast meant you moved before the enemy acquired you as a target. Precise meant every shell had a purpose. Ruthless meant when you had an advantage, you pressed it until the enemy broke. He drilled his crew until they functioned like one organism. His gunner, Bert Close, could spot and engage targets in seconds. His loader, Willis Peeler, could slam shells into the breach so fast it sounded like a machine gun. His driver, Wilbert Richards, knew every trick to position the tank for the perfect shot. And his assistant driver, Del Boggs, was the eyes when everyone else was focused on killing. They weren't just a crew, they were brothers, and Pool trained them with one goal: survive and win. By September 1944, Pool's tank had already destroyed dozens of German vehicles, but nothing prepared them for what was coming. Because war has a way of testing legends, and sometimes it throws impossible odds at you just to see what you're made of. September 19th, 1944, northern France. The Third Army was pushing hard toward the German border. Pool's unit, the 3rd Armored Division, was spearheading the advance. They'd been fighting nonstop for weeks. Every crew was exhausted. Every tank was running on borrowed time. But the intelligence reports said the area ahead was clear: light resistance. maybe some scattered infantry, nothing an armored column could handle. The reports were wrong. What Poole didn't know was that the Germans had pulled back an entire Panzer regiment to this exact sector, not scattered units, not broken remnants, a concentrated force of over 40 tanks and tank destroyers. Tigers, Panthers, Panzer IVs, Sturmgeschütz assault guns. They'd position themselves in a classic German ambush formation, hold down positions behind hedgerows and ridges, overlapping fields of fire. Escape routes planned. This wasn't a skirmish force. This was a killing field, and Poole's column was about to drive straight into it. The first sign came from the scouts. Dust on the horizon. Too much dust. Then shapes. Low, angular shapes that didn't belong to farms or villages. The radio crackled. Contact front. Multiple armored vehicles. I count at least 20. No, more. They're everywhere. The American column stopped. Officers conferred. This wasn't what they'd signed up for today. This was supposed to be a pursuit, not a pitched battle. Several Shermans began backing up, seeking cover. Standard doctrine when you're outnumbered and outgunned. Live to fight another day. But Poole's tank didn't reverse. It rolled forward. His platoon leader got on the radio. Poole, what are you doing? Fall back. We need to regroup. Poole's response was calm, almost casual. We're not retreating. We're hunting. Let me explain exactly what that meant, because what happened next wasn't bravery or recklessness. It was calculation. Poole understood something fundamental about armored warfare that most tank crews never learned. The German tanks had superior armor and guns, but they had weaknesses. German tanks were heavy. That made them slow to reposition. Their transmissions were complex and prone to breaking down. And most critically, their doctrine emphasized static defense. They'd find a good position and hold it. Shermans were lighter. They could accelerate, reverse, and maneuver in ways a Tiger never could. And Poole's crew had trained for one specific scenario: how to fight when you're outmatched. The answer? Never fight fair. Use speed and terrain to break up their formations, force them to rotate turrets, make them panic, and above all, never stop moving. Poole scanned the battlefield. Hedgerows, small hills, a village on the left. He was reading terrain like a chess player reads a board. He keyed his radio. Stay spread. Use smoke. Hit and move. They're expecting us to run, so we attack. The first German tank Poole spotted was a Panther, hull down behind a hedgerow. Its long 75mm gun was pointed down the road, waiting for the American column. Classic ambush position. The Panther commander probably thought he'd get 3 or 4 easy kills before the Americans even knew where the fire was coming from. Poole's driver positioned them behind a stone wall. The Sherman was completely hidden. Poole studied the Panther through his periscope. Range, 800 meters. Too far for a frontal shot to penetrate. But Panthers had a weakness. Their side armor was much thinner. And there was a gap in that hedgerow, about 10 meters wide. Poole keyed his intercom. Driver, on my command, full throttle through that gap. Gunner, you'll have maybe 2 seconds for a side shot. Make it count. The crew tensed. This was insane. They'd be completely exposed. Now! The Sherman exploded forward. The 4 GAA engine roared as they crashed through the gap. The German crew spotted them, started traversing their turret, but they were too slow. Close, the gunner had already acquired the target. The Panther's side armor filled his sight. Up! Peeler slammed the shell home. Fire! The 76mm gun barked. The armor-piercing shell crossed 800 meters in under a second and punched through the Panther's side armor. The German tank didn't explode. It just stopped. Smoke poured from the hatches. The crew bailed out, running. Poole didn't celebrate. He was already scanning for the next threat. 2 o'clock, Panzer IV. The second kill came 30 seconds later. Same technique, speed, positioning, precision. But now the Germans knew where Poole was, and they were angry. Here's the thing about fighting 40 tanks with one. You can't win by trading shots. You have to make them afraid. Poole's Sherman kicked up a massive dust cloud as it raced across the battlefield. The driver was throwing it into reverse, then forward, then sharp turns. Any German gunner trying to track them was seeing nothing but dust and chaos. The radio in Poole's tank was a symphony of controlled chaos.
Del Boggs calling out bearing and range. Close, confirming targets. Peeler announcing ammunition counts. Bearing 350, Panther 900 meters. Identified. Up. Fire. Another hit. The Panther's turret ring shattered. The entire turret seized up, unable to rotate. The German radio networks were going haywire. They were reporting a full American armored column, multiple Shermans attacking from different directions. It couldn't be one tank. It was impossible for one tank to be in that many places. But it was. Poole was using every piece of cover, every fold in the terrain. He'd pop out, take a shot, and disappear before return fire arrived. Then he'd appear 300 meters away and do it again. The Germans started making mistakes. Panic will do that. One Tiger commander, frustrated at losing track of Poole, ordered his driver to advance and flush out the Americans. Big mistake. The Tiger rumbled over a small ridge, exposing its thinner belly armor to Poole's position. Close didn't hesitate. The shot went through the Tiger's underside and ignited the ammunition. The explosion was so massive that it knocked nearby German infantry off their feet. Poole keyed his radio to the rest of his platoon. "See that? They're not invincible. They're just metal and men. And right now they're confused. Press them." Other American tanks started joining the fight, emboldened by Poole's success. But Poole was still the tip of the spear, still the one taking the biggest risks. Because he understood something profound about combat. Momentum is everything. Once the enemy starts retreating mentally, you don't let him recover. You keep hitting until they break completely. 20 minutes into the fight, Poole's ammunition was running low. Peeler was down to 30 rounds. In a normal engagement, that's plenty. But this wasn't normal. "How many have we killed?" Poole asked. Boggs had been keeping count. 7 confirmed, maybe 8. That last Panzer IV might have just lost its track. 7 German tanks. That was already a legendary engagement. Most Sherman crews never killed more than 2 or 3 enemy tanks in their entire service. But there were still 30-plus German vehicles out there, and they were adapting. A German commander, realizing they were dealing with an exceptional crew, changed tactics. Instead of static defense, he sent 3 Panthers in a coordinated assault, 1 from the front, 2 trying to flank. This was the nightmare scenario. Caught in a crossfire, no matter how fast Poole moved, one of those Panthers would get a shot. Poole saw them coming. His mind raced through options. Fight, no good angles. Retreat, they'd run him down. Smoke, might buy seconds. Then he saw it. A sunken road almost invisible behind a hedgerow. "Driver, hard left, into that depression." The Sherman dove into the sunken road just as all 3 Panthers fired. The shells screamed overhead, missing by meters. Now Poole was below ground level. The Panthers had to advance to get a shot angle, and that meant they'd be exposed. Poole waited, patient, counting seconds in his head. He heard the rumble of engines getting closer. The first Panther crested the ridge, turret searching. "Fire!" The shell caught it in the front glossus, a weak point where the armor plates joined. The Panther's engine exploded in flames. The second Panther appeared. Close was already traversing. "Up! Fire!" Another kill. The Panther slewed sideways, trailing smoke. The third Panther commander saw his 2 companions die in 10 seconds and decided survival was better than glory. He reversed back over the ridge. Poole's crew was breathing hard. Peeler's loader's arms felt like lead. Close's eyes were burning from staring through the gun sight. But they were alive. And they were winning. By now, you have to understand what was happening in the German ranks. They'd started this engagement expecting easy kills. American Shermans were supposed to be death traps. Instead, they were watching their best tanks get systematically destroyed by what seemed like a phantom. Reports were conflicting. Some crews swore they were fighting multiple enemy tanks. Others said it was just one, but it moved impossibly fast. The German commander pulled his remaining forces back to reform. He'd lost over a dozen tanks. His men were rattled. This was supposed to be a turkey shoot, not a bloodshed. But Poole didn't give them time to regroup. He pressed forward into the village where several German tanks had taken cover behind stone buildings. This was close quarters fighting, the kind where armor thickness doesn't matter because you're shooting at point-blank range. Poole's Sherman rounded a corner and came face to face with a Panzer IV, maybe 30 meters away. Both crews saw each other at the instant, but Close was faster. 1 second faster. That's all it took. The German crew never got a shot off. The American shell went through the front armor like it was paper. Another corner, another German tank. This one was a Jagdpanzer, a tank destroyer with a massive gun. But it couldn't traverse fast enough in the narrow street. Pool's driver rammed it. Actually rammed it with the Sherman's front slope. The impact jarred everyone's teeth, but it knocked the Jagdpanzer's gun off target. Close put a shell into its side at contact range. The village fighting lasted less than 10 minutes. Pool's tank emerged from the smoke like a wraith, scarred and battered, but still moving. Behind him, 4 more German vehicles burned. Let me paint you the picture at this point. Pool's Sherman was covered in soot. The barrel was scorched from rapid fire. Inside, the crew was drenched in sweat. Shell casings littered the floor up to their ankles. They'd been fighting for over an hour. They'd killed 12 confirmed German tanks. 12! In World War II, killing 5 enemy tanks in your entire service earned you A status. Pool had done 12 in one battle. But the ammunition counter was terrifying. 6 rounds left. 6 shells between them and being helpless. Pool radioed back to command. "We're nearly black on ammo. Any chance of resupply?" The response was grim. "Negative. Resupply vehicles can't get through. German forces still control the main road. You need to disengage."
Poole looked at his crew. They were exhausted. They'd done the impossible already. Nobody would blame them for pulling back. But through his periscope, he could see German tanks regrouping in the distance. If they got organized, if they launched a coordinated counterattack, the entire American advance could stall. "We've got 6 rounds," Poole said to his crew. "That's 6 chances to make sure those Germans stay scared. Who's with me?" Nobody answered with words. Peeler loaded another shell, close, sighted through his scope. Richards gunned the engine. That was answer enough. The final phase of the battle was the most dangerous. The Germans knew now that they were dealing with a single exceptional crew. They'd adjusted their tactics. No more isolated tanks. No more predictable movements. They came at Poole in a coordinated assault. 5 Panthers, moving in a V formation, supporting each other's blind spots. This was it. The moment where skill and luck would determine everything. Poole positioned his Sherman behind a knocked-out German tank, using it as a shield. He waited until the Panthers were committed to their approach, too close to retreat without exposing their sides. Rightmost Panther, that's the leader. Close acquired the target. 1,200 meters. Long range for a Sherman, but the Panther was button-hooked, exposing a thin section of side armor. "Up! Fire!" The shell flew true. The Panther's track exploded. The tank slewed to a stop, blocking the path of the 2 Panthers behind it. Now the German formation was bunched up, exactly what Poole wanted. Second Panther, the one trying to go around. Another shell, another hit. The Panther's turret froze. 4 rounds left. 3 remaining Panthers spread out, trying to flank. But Poole was already moving. The Sherman dashed between cover points, firing on the move. It was the kind of gunnery that shouldn't be possible. Firing accurately while moving at speed over rough terrain. But Close and Poole had practiced this 1,000 times. 3 rounds left. 3 Panthers still hunting. One of the Germans got smart. He used smoke shells to obscure Poole's vision. Suddenly he couldn't see. The battlefield was a gray wall. "Driver, reverse, get us out of this smoke." But as they backed up, they exposed themselves to a Panther that had circled wide. The German fired. The shell hit Poole's Sherman on the front slope armor. The impact was like being inside a church bell when it rings. The entire crew was stunned, ears ringing, vision blurred, but the armor held. The shell had glanced off, digging a massive gouge but not penetrating. Poole shook off the concussion. "Return fire, now!" Close, half dazed, acquired the Panther that had just shot them. Range, 600 meters. The German crew was probably celebrating their hit, expecting the Sherman to brew up. "Up! Fire!" The American shell caught the Panther in the turret ring. Catastrophic kill. The turret literally separated from the hull. 2 rounds left. 2 Panthers. And those 2 Panthers decided they'd had enough. Poole watched through his periscope as they reversed, then turned and fled. Actually fled. 2 of Germany's best tanks running from 1 Sherman.
Let that sink in. The Germans retreated. The battlefield fell silent except for the crackling of burning vehicles. Pool's crew sat in their positions, too exhausted to celebrate. Peeler broke the silence. Did we just win? Pool scanned the horizon one more time. No more German tanks. No more threats, just smoke and wreckage. Yeah, he said quietly. We won. The crew started laughing, not triumphant laughter, the kind of laughter that comes when you survived something that should have killed you. Relief and disbelief mixed together. Pool radioed command. Enemy armor destroyed or dispersed. Area secure. We're coming back. The response from headquarters was stunned silence. Then, say again, did you say area secure? Confirmed. We counted 12 kills, maybe more. The rest retreated. Another pause. One tank. One tank. When Pool's Sherman rolled back into friendly lines, it looked like it had driven through hell. The armor was scorched black. The barrel was discolored from heat. There were impact marks from German shells that had glanced off or missed by inches. The crew climbed out on shaking legs. Peeler's hands were cramped from loading shells. Close's eyes were bloodshot. Richards could barely stand. Other tank crews gathered around, staring. The story had already spread through radio chatter. 1 Sherman versus 40 German tanks. Nobody could believe it. Pool's platoon leader walked over, looking at the battered tank like it was a ghost. How? Was all he could ask. Pool thought about it. How do you explain something that shouldn't be possible? We moved first, we shot first, and we didn't give them time to think. But here's the thing. It wasn't just tactics. It wasn't just skill. It was trust. Pool trusted his crew to execute perfectly under impossible pressure. They trusted him to make the right calls, even when every call seemed suicidal. That trust let them function as one machine, faster and more precise than the sum of their parts. Later that day, reconnaissance units went through the battlefield. They counted the wrecks, confirmed the kills. 12 German tanks destroyed, another 8 damaged so badly they were abandoned, and dozens more scattered, their crews demoralized and broken. 1 Sherman, 1 crew, 1 impossible day. But the story doesn't end there, because Pool's legend only grew. Over the next few weeks, his kill count climbed. Every engagement, he and his crew pulled off something that seemed impossible. By the time he was wounded in September 1944, not killed, just wounded enough to be pulled from combat, his official tally was staggering. 258 enemy vehicles destroyed. Not just tanks, half-tracks, armored cars, self-propelled guns, but the tank kills alone numbered over 80. 80 German tanks, 1 American crew. The Germans developed an unhealthy respect for certain Allied tank crews. They had intelligence reports on the best Sherman commanders, and Lafayette Pool was at the top of that list. They called him der Panzerfahrer, the devil tank driver. When German tank commanders spotted a Sherman moving with Pool's signature style, aggressive, fast, unpredictable, they radioed warnings to other units. That one's different. Be careful. Let me tell you what that means. The Germans, who had Tigers and Panthers and every technical advantage, were afraid of 1 American Sherman crew. That's not about armor thickness or gun caliber. That's about the human element. Pool survived the war. He went home to Texas. He didn't talk much about his service. When people asked how he did what he did, he'd shrug and say, had a good crew. That's the mark of a true leader. He never took personal credit. It was always we, never I. Now, here's what the story really means, why it matters beyond just being an incredible tale of combat. The Sherman tank has been maligned for decades. Historians and armchair generals love to trash it. Undergunned, underarmored, death trap. But the Sherman won World War II. Not Tigers, not Panthers, Shermans. Because war isn't just about having the best equipment. It's about having equipment that's reliable, maintainable, and producible in numbers. It's about training crews who can think and adapt. It's about doctrine that emphasizes coordination over individual heroics. The Germans built mechanical marvels that broke down constantly. The Americans built workhorses that kept running. The Germans trained their crews to follow rigid doctrine. The Americans trained their crews to think and improvise. And when you put an exceptional crew in a decent tank, you get Lafayette Pool. You get the impossible becoming possible. But here's the deeper truth. Pool wasn't superhuman. He was a steelworker from Texas who learned his craft and practiced it obsessively. His crew weren't heroes from central casting. They were ordinary Americans who trained together and trusted each other. That's the real lesson. Excellence isn't about natural talent or superior equipment. It's about preparation, trust, and refusing to accept defeat. Poole looked at impossible odds and decided they weren't impossible, just difficult. His crew believed him, and together they proved him right. Think about that September day in 1944. 40 German tanks, 1 Sherman. On paper, it's a massacre. The Sherman doesn't stand a chance. Every tactical manual, every statistic, every historical precedent says the Sherman gets destroyed in minutes. But Poole and his crew changed the rules. They rewrote what was possible. And they did it not through some miracle or fluke, but through skill, coordination, and sheer determination. The Germans expected the Americans to run. Standard doctrine when outnumbered. Poole attacked instead. And that single decision, that refusal to accept the expected outcome, created a cascade effect. The Germans got confused, then worried, then scared. Fear is contagious in battle. Once one crew starts to panic, it spreads. And Poole exploited that. He didn't just fight a tactical battle, he fought a psychological one. Every time a German tank exploded, every time Poole appeared somewhere he shouldn't be, the enemy's confidence cracked a little more. By the end, veteran Panzer crews were retreating from a single Sherman, not because it was tactically superior, because they'd lost faith that they could beat it. That's the power of one exceptional unit. It's not just about the kills they rack up, it's about the effect they have on enemy morale and friendly confidence. After Poole's engagement, other American tank crews in the sector fought more aggressively. They'd seen what was possible. If Poole could beat 40 German tanks, they could handle 5 or 10. Leadership by example isn't just a platitude, it's a force multiplier in combat. Let's talk about the crew for a moment, because Poole gets most of the credit in the history books, but he'd be the first to tell you it was a team effort. Bert Close, the gunner. He had to make split-second decisions under fire, identify targets, calculate lead and elevation, and fire accurately while the tank was moving. Most gunners couldn't hit anything while moving. Close rarely missed. Willis Peeler, the loader. His job was physically exhausting. A 76mm shell weighs about 25 pounds. Multiply that by the 60-plus rounds they fired that day. He was lifting and loading over 1,500 pounds of ammunition while the tank pitched and bucked and enemy shells exploded around them. And he never slowed down. Wilbert Richards, the driver. He had to position the tank perfectly while Poole called out directions. Forward, stop, reverse, sharp left. And he had to do it while watching for obstacles, avoiding enemy fire, and keeping the tank in the fight. One mistake, hitting a ditch, getting stuck in mud, and they'd all die. Del Boggs, assistant driver and bow gunner. He was Poole's extra set of eyes, calling out threats Poole couldn't see, watching for infantry with anti-tank weapons, keeping track of ammunition counts. The job that gets the least glory, but is absolutely critical. 5 men, operating as one, in the most stressful environment imaginable. They trained together for months. They knew each other's rhythms. Poole didn't have to say, fire. Close knew from the tone of his voice whether to fire immediately or wait a split second for better positioning. Richards could feel what Poole wanted through the intercom tone before the actual command came. That's chemistry. That's trust built through shared hardship and endless practice. And that's why they survived when they shouldn't have. Now, let me address something important. This story sounds almost too incredible to be true. Hollywood couldn't write this. Audiences would call it unrealistic. But every fact I've told you is verified. The after-action reports exist. The German records corroborate the American accounts. The physical evidence, the burned-out German tanks, was photographed and documented. Lafayette Pool's military records show 258 enemy vehicles destroyed, 12 of them in that single engagement. The 3rd Armored Division's history confirms it. German unit diaries mention the engagement and the heavy losses. This isn't myth. This isn't propaganda. This is documented history that happens to be unbelievable. And that's what makes it so powerful. Because if this happened, if one Sherman crew really did beat impossible odds through skill and determination, what else is possible? How many times have you faced something that seemed impossible? A challenge at work, a personal goal, a situation where everyone expected you to fail? Pool didn't have better equipment than anyone else. He didn't have more resources. He just had a better mindset and a trained crew who believed in each other. That's replicable. Not the specific circumstances, but the underlying principles. Refuse to accept the expected outcome. Train relentlessly. Trust your team. And when the moment comes, attack the problem instead of retreating from it. There's a photograph of Pool and his crew taken a few weeks before the 40 tank engagement. They're standing in front of their Sherman, which they'd nicknamed In the Mood, after the popular Glenn Miller song. They look young. Pool was 21. Most of his crew was the same age or younger. They're smiling in the photo, casual and relaxed. You look at that photo and you think, these are kids. They should be in college or working their first jobs or dating and going to movies. Instead, they're about to fight one of the most intense tank battles in history. That's war. It takes ordinary people and puts them in extraordinary circumstances. And sometimes, rarely, those people rise to the occasion in ways that seem superhuman. But they're not superhuman. They're just pushed to discover capabilities they didn't know they had. Pool discovered he could read a battlefield like a book. Close discovered he could hit targets others couldn't. Peeler discovered he had almost superhuman endurance. Richards discovered he could drive with precision under fire. Boggs discovered he could process information and call it out faster than he thought possible. They discovered these things because they had to. Survival demanded it. And that's another lesson here. You don't know what you're capable of until you're tested. Most people go their whole lives never knowing their true limits because they never face a situation that pushes them there. Pool and his crew found out. And what they found out was that their limits were way beyond where they had imagined. After the war, Pool returned to Texas. He married, he worked, he lived a normal life.
But veterans who served with him never forgot. At reunions, they'd seek him out, want to shake his hand, tell him that his example had inspired them to fight harder, to believe they could win even when outnumbered. Pool would smile and deflect. "I just did my job," he'd say. But it was more than that. He'd shown what was possible when you refused to give up, when you trained hard, when you trusted your crew. There's a memorial now at Fort Benning, Georgia, honoring the greatest American tank aces of World War II. Pool's name is near the top of the list. 258 enemy vehicles, 81 tanks. Numbers that seem impossible, but they're not. They're real, documented, verified. One man, one crew, one war. And a legacy that says this: armor doesn't win battles. Technology doesn't win battles. Numbers help, but they don't guarantee victory. What wins battles is the human element: skill, determination, trust, leadership. Pool had all of those, and he had them in a crew that could execute his vision, even when that vision seemed crazy. Let me leave you with one final image. The battlefield after Pool's engagement. German tanks scattered across the landscape, some burning, some abandoned. Shell casings littered around the positions where Pool had fired from. And in the middle of it all, one battered Sherman. Scarred, scorched, but still running. The engine idling. The crew climbing out, exhausted, but alive. That Sherman didn't look like much. Compared to a Tiger or Panther, it was smaller, lighter, less impressive. But on that day,
It was the most dangerous piece of equipment on the battlefield. Not because of its armor or gun, because of the 5 men inside it. The Germans had superior tanks. They had superior position. They had overwhelming numbers. And they lost. They lost to one American crew who refused to play by the expected rules. That's the story of Lafayette War Daddy Pool, a steel worker from Texas who became the most dangerous tank commander the Germans faced, who turned a death-trap Sherman into a legend, who showed that impossible odds aren't really impossible if you have the right mindset and the right team. 40 German tanks, one Sherman, and at the end of the day, the Sherman rolled away victorious. That's not just a story about tank warfare. That's a story about human potential, about what becomes possible when you refuse to accept defeat. Poole and his crew proved something that day. They proved that excellence beats superiority, that speed and skill can overcome armor and firepower, that 5 people working in perfect coordination are more powerful than 40 working independently. And they proved one more thing, the most important thing. You don't need to be the biggest or the strongest to win. You just need to be the best, the most prepared, the most determined. Lafayette Poole was all of those things, and so was his crew. When the Germans called him the devil tank driver, they meant it as fear, as respect, as a warning to other Panzer crews. If you see that tank, be very, very careful. Poole earned that name one engagement at a time, one impossible victory at a time. And on that September day in 1944, when he faced 40 tanks and refused to retreat, he cemented his legend forever. One Sherman, 5 men, impossible odds, and a victory that changed what everyone thought was possible. That's the story of when one Sherman tank fought 40 German tanks and won. Remember it. Remember that when you face your own impossible odds. Remember that somewhere in history, 5 Americans in a cramped steel box decided that 40 to 1 odds just meant they had to be 40 times better. And they were.